Hi, everyone. This week we're going to be talking about yellow fever. Give me 1 second and I will pull up my PowerPoint for the week. All right, so here's the background on yellow fever. So, yellow fever is an acute viral hemorrhagic disease. Now, we've talked about viruses before. You should know that by now that virus is an infectious agent. It's small. It replicates only inside the living cells of an organism. So like HIV, like influenza, it's caused by a virus. It is hemorrhagic, so it can cause bleeding, and it is considered a fever. Now, there are a couple of things you should know about this. The virus itself, the yellow fever, is caused by the viruses on the screen. We'll come back to this in a minute, the agent of this. The symptoms of this particular virus, symptoms include typically when you get infected with yellow fever, headache, jaundice, muscle pain, nausea, vomiting, fatigue. So on the right, you can see here, incubation period, usually typically 3 to 6 days. You get infected, and before you develop your symptoms, that's the incubation period. Phase 1, you can see the symptoms here. This is the acute phase when you're sick, usually lasts 3 to 4 days. And for most patients, about 85% of people get yellow fever, your conditions improve and your symptoms disappear. And about 15% of cases, people enter a second phase with recurring fever. This time is accompanied by jaundice. Your skin gets yellow, which is the reason why it's called yellow fever. And this is due to liver damage, as well as abdominal pain. I said it's a hemorrhagic fever. So people who proceed to this phase may experience bleeding in the mouth, the eyes, and the gastrointestinal tract, which is that causes you to vomit, and this will contain blood. It's pretty horrific. There may also be kidney failure and delirium. Among those who develop jaundice, the fatality rate is about 20 to 50%. While the overall fatality rate for anybody who gets yellow fever is about 5%. So 5% of all people who get yellow fever will die. People who enter into that second phase, especially those that get jaundice, about 20 to 50% of those people are going to die. The plus side of getting infection and surviving is that those who survive will typically develop some type of lifelong immunity to yellow fever and usually do not have permanent organ damage. Let's talk about the origin of this particular place, of this particular virus. So scientists estimate that yellow fever originated in Africa around 3000 BCE. So about 3000 BCE, 5,000 years ago, yellow fever emerged. It probably came from a virus from primates, similar to HIV. Right? Primates are one way we can get viruses. It probably circulated. It was a virus that was in primates, and that it circulated between them and mosquitoes for thousands of years. You can see here on the right, this is the jungle cycle, the sylvatic cycle that involves the transmission of the virus between non-human primates like monkeys and mosquito species found in the forest canopy. Some humans may have been infected, but not in large numbers, as humans lived in small villages. Over thousands of years, the mosquitoes carrying the virus adapted to village life and then to city life. They got used to feeding off of human beings, and they made their way to larger cities and coastal towns and spread yellow fever with them. So yellow fever needed a bigger population of human beings to become a pandemic, similar to the other diseases we've been talking about. And as human beings start to live in larger populations and mosquitoes get used to being amongst human beings, they're going to be spreading this and causing this and turning this into a pandemic. Yellow fever is endemic in Africa, right? So meaning that it originates and it circulates in Africa, but it eventually spreads and becomes a global pandemic. We can see here on the right the depiction of how this is likely spread. So the way that it is likely spread and becomes a global pandemic is that it's endemic here in Africa. Europeans begin the process of enslaving people in Africa starting in the 15th century. They capture and enslave people from Africa, and then we'll bring them to Central and South America and North America starting in the 1500s. When they do so, when they bring enslaved people from Africa to the New World, to the Americas, they will also bring with them mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are going to hop on board this ship. Mosquitoes are going to find on the ship two sources that are important. Number one, human beings that they can feed off of. Number two, open sources of water. Right? They're going to be barrels full of water for water purposes for the crew and for the enslaved people on board. These are going to be great breeding grounds for mosquitoes. These mosquitoes, which have yellow fever, are going to lay eggs. The larvae are going to emerge. They're going to get yellow fever from their parents. Then they're going to be feeding off of human beings. When the ships reach Americas, then these yellow fever mosquitoes, these here, this is what's called the Aedes aegypti mosquito. They're then going to transmit it to people in the Americas. When it reaches the Americas, the populations that are going to now be exposed to yellow fever had never developed immunity. There are, no natural cases of yellow fever prior to this moment. So no one in Americas has immunity to yellow fever. And so you're going to have these impacts of this. And so global trade and the slave trade will increase the spread of yellow fever. The first known epidemic in what is Central America takes place in 1648 in the Yucatan Peninsula. This has been described in Mayan manuscripts. Between 1668 and 1699, there are outbreaks reported in New York, in Boston, and Charleston. And typically in northern areas, we see this outbreak of the pandemic in summer months. So this is the opposite of influenza, which we talked about. Influenza, we talked about the factors that lead to the spread of influenza flu in winter. Yellow fever is going to spread in the summer. Now, I'll ask you again, think about why that is, right? And the answer is going to be, this is the time period when mosquitoes are going to be alive and be able to circulate the virus. So every year, ships are going to bring mosquitoes upriver. Mosquitoes are then going to spread it in cities. Then it's going to contract in winters as mosquitoes die. However, doctors didn't suspect a mosquito link and assumed that yellow fever spread through human-to-human contact. It's not until the late 19th century that the mosquito, as the vector, as the spreader of yellow fever, is confirmed. Right. These are different kinds of mosquitoes that could be carriers of this. Right, so the Aedes aegypti one on the left, they are the yellow fever mosquito. They breed primarily in and around human populations, so they live and then have offspring around human beings. They fly about 200 yards in distances, so they don't spread disease very far, but they can spread disease to human beings, including dengue fever, which is also another hemorrhagic fever, yellow fever, chikungunya, and Zika. Right, so the Zika spread that we had, right, coming out of Brazil, South America, in recent years that's also spread by Aedes aegypti. Anopheles mosquitoes, they have a much longer range. They have a flight range of about 1 mile. And they can carry malaria. And then we've got the Culex mosquito as well. Right? And they can carry West Nile viruses. So mosquitoes can be what are called vectors. They are the spreaders of a particular type of disease. Yellow fever is going to have huge impacts on global events. Every single one of these revolutions, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, Latin American revolutions are impacted and are aided by the spread of yellow fever. For example, the Haitian Revolution, when French soldiers are sent to Haiti to put down the insurrection, many of them are going to die from yellow fever because they've not been previously exposed to this. So one of the reasons why Haitians are able to successfully overthrow the French is because French soldiers don't have immunity to yellow fever. Yellow fever in particular has also had a huge impact on places here in Louisiana. Louisiana, starting in the 19th century, will have outbreaks of this. In particular, New Orleans will have huge outbreaks of yellow fever. Those of you who've taken my previous course on Louisiana history, you all have done readings and learned about the impact of yellow fever in New Orleans over the course of the 19th century. And for those of you not familiar, we know that it killed at least 100,000 people and probably more in New Orleans in the 19th century. New Orleans is a perfect breeding ground. It's warm. It's got a lot of open water sources, including the canals and the channels. And it's got sucrose, sugar. Sugar is a good nutrient food source for mosquitoes, and there's a lot of them because we've developed plantations, sugarcane plantations by the beginning of the 19th century. You also have a large population that has never been exposed to yellow fever in the form of immigrants. There's a large population of enslaved people and enslaved ships that are coming over and bringing mosquitoes and introducing it to it. So New Orleans is the perfect breeding ground for it. And it's not until the late 19th century that we discover mosquitoes as the vector. And it's not until 1905 that we really have efforts to eliminate this. So there are yellow fever outbreaks in Louisiana and New Orleans in particular through 1905. That's the last major yellow fever epidemic in the United States. So you'll be reading this week about yellow fever, about the spread of yellow fever, about the efforts to prevent it, about how people tried to prevent the spread of it even before they know what the causative agent is. You'll be doing some readings in particular about Philadelphia. And you'll read about the impact of the spread of yellow fever onto relations in Philadelphia, in particular impacting the relations between white inhabitants of Philadelphia and then free people of color and enslaved people in Philadelphia, and how this really impacts the social dynamics that are placed there. Again, similar to previous weeks, you'll talk about a lot about race and read a lot about race because there is this assumption that people who are of African ancestry have some type of immunity to yellow fever. And you'll see how that's going to impact the ways that enslaved people and free people of color are treated and expected to treat white people in Philadelphia. So again, work on the readings, read about yellow fever, the spread of it, the efforts to contain it. You'll do a deep dive this week on Philadelphia and that epidemic there in Philadelphia and see how this impacts the city and the conditions that lead to it. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope that you all have a great week.